Right. Interesting readings this morning. Quite a mix. But the important thing, of course, the major focus of the readings primarily was the golden calf incident. Yeah. So we need to think about when that actually happened, when it occurred. Certainly it was at the foot of Mount Sinai, Mount Horeb. But it's interesting that it actually occurred before the Mishkan was actually built. They were still very much a rabble of people having come out of slavery, of course. They really didn't understand about Yahweh to any great extent. And that's the real issue, I think, of the important thing about the golden calf incident, that basically they hadn't come to terms with who Yahweh really was. When you think about it, at the time they'd been in Egypt, when the family first went there, 70 of them, they were all aware of El Shaddai, having worked with Abraham first, then Yitzhak, and then finally Yaakov. And then, of course, what experienced with Yosef, with the famine and the providing of food at that stage. But then, of course, after that, there was a long gap from the time when Yosef died until Moshe came on the scene. And then, of course, Moshe tried to defend his people, went out and killed an Egyptian. So he had to escape and basically remained in Midian for the next 40 years, which is a long time, virtually a lifetime. So he paid a life sentence for murder, effectively. Then, of course, he has the encounter at the burning bush. And Yahweh says, go back to Egypt and tell my people that they're going to leave and go to the territory that's promised to Abraham. So Moshe goes back and tells them all about Yahweh. But they had no concept of who Yahweh was. They'd only ever known God as El Shaddai. So when they finally leave Egypt, after the plagues, the first thing they start doing is grumbling. And they keep on grumbling all the time until they reach Mount Horeb. But in the 3 days before Yahweh came down on the mountain and gave them the 10 words, Moshe told them what to do and how to prepare, and they said, whatever you do, whatever Yahweh says, we will do. And the moment they heard him speaking from the mountain, they turned around and said, don't let God ever speak to us again. You speak to him, and then come and tell us what he says, because it was too powerful and too overwhelming. They didn't want to experience God again. But still, they didn't know Yahweh. They just knew him as the God of the universe, effectively. So then, of course, Moshe went back up the mountain after the 10 words had been given to receive the tablets of stone. Now, it's an interesting feature that when he went up the mountain, he spent 40 days and 40 nights there. And it's been argued by some of the rabbis that basically because they believed he'd be back on a certain date and he didn't come back on that date, that they lost faith and started wanting Aaron to build the calf. But they had no concept of how long he was going to be up there. Could have only been a few days. Yahweh didn't tell Moshe how long he was going to be there. If we look at chapter 34, verse 27, Yahweh said to Moshe, write these words down, because they are the terms of the covenant, which are the 10 words, of course, that he'd spoken from the top of Mount Horeb. I have made this covenant with you and with Israel. That's verse 27. The very next verse says, Moshe was up there with Yahweh for 40 days and 40 nights. Yahweh said, "Come up and I will write those words on the tablets." Verse 28 is an adage which gives you the indication of how long he was up there. Yahweh didn't say it. It's an important point, because those people, imagine 40 days is what? A month and a half at least. So if we were absent from God for a month and a half, we'd start to lose where we're going, lose our direction. And that's really what they were doing. And we must also keep in mind the fact that it wasn't only the descendants of Yaakov who were actually a family. There were a whole mixed multitude with them. There were people who'd gone to Egypt, sold themselves to Pharaoh because of the famine. But they realized when they saw the plagues and everything that occurred, that this God really was the God of the universe. So they went with Israel. But they really weren't part of Israel at that stage. And when things didn't go their way, they wanted to revert back to what they'd known for so long, hurry down from the mountain because of what the people are doing. And what did they say? They said, "Let's make ourselves gods to lead us, because we don't know what's become of Moshe." They didn't say just one God. They said, "Let's make gods to lead us." So they had been so used to the multiplicity of gods in Egypt that they were going back to what they'd been used to. They wanted something tangible. Now, why gods? If you look back in history at that stage, basically, and the Shaul talks about the elemental spirits, do not turn back to the elemental spirits. So really, the gods of the nations, the gods of the peoples, were actually their tangible representations of the forces of nature. Everything, effectively, because of the superstition of that period, everything was basically a god. So they wanted examples of these things to lead them, because they'd lost faith in the fact that Moshe was ever going to come back. And when you think back to when the 10 words were given, and the people said, "Don't let God speak to us again. You speak to God and then come to us and tell us what he says." It was so fearful that after that, of course, they would have thought, well, hang on, Moshe's gone up the mountain. He didn't say how long he was going to be. He's probably been consumed by the fire on the mountain. He was never going to come back. We need something else to guide us through the wilderness. So it makes perfect sense, really, when you think of the context of what was actually occurring at that time as to why they did what they did. But of course, Yahweh makes it abundantly clear to Moshe who he was. Moshe was so upset with what had occurred. It says that he didn't actually just drop the tablets. He said in, where is it? Chapter 32, verse 19, sorry. He threw the tablets down and shattered them at the base of the mountain. Well, if they were written on tablets, they were obviously granite or something of profound significance, something strong that would last forever. So just dropping them on the ground, they would have just bounced. But he actually threw them down. That's just how frustrated he was with the people. So he broke the tablets. And then, of course, we don't know exactly how soon it was afterwards. He went back up the mountain again and received the second set of tablets, which, of course, eventually were put into the Ark of the Covenant. And the people never saw those tablets because they were put into the Ark of the Covenant. So I think that's important also, because the Ark of the Covenant, people have been trying desperately down through the centuries to find it. But the fact that Moshe put the very message from Yahweh, the very essence of the whole Torah, on those their second set of tablets into the ark, it's in Revelation that the ark is seen. And it's like a time capsule. When it finally comes back, for those who are prepared to listen, those who are prepared to give their life to Yahweh, to Yeshua, and come through the great white throne judgment, there will be the model. There will be the original commands from Yahweh himself in the Ark of the Covenant. So I think it's quite logical that the second set of tablets were put into the Ark of the Covenant, and the people never saw them. They had to have faith, they had to have trust of what Moshe was telling them and what the written Torah tells them as he had written it down. There's another interesting point, I think, that needs to be considered, because all the way through this parashah and many of the other parashahs, it talks about the tent of meeting. And in most cases, when it speaks about the tent of meeting, it's actually referring to the Mishkan, which they are, of course, yet to build. But when we come to chapter 33, verse 7 through 10, we are told that after Moshe had received the tablets, he obviously had people coming to him questioning him about the meaning of the words of the Torah. And that's where what Rabbinical Judaism call, of course, is the oral Torah came from. Basically, Moshe's explanation for the meaning of the words from Yahweh directly. So in those verses, chapter 33, verses 7 through 10, it tells us that Moshe actually took or pitched a tent outside the camp, well outside the camp, and he called that the tent of meeting. Now I think this is vitally important, because that same phrase, tent of meeting, has been used quite frequently through the rest of Torah when it's talking about what he calls in other places. In the latter, when Stephen was talking about the history in Acts chapter 7, it says, our fathers had a tent of witness in the wilderness. A tent of witness. But what Moshe built outside the camp was a tent of meeting. There's a very distinct difference, because the tent of witness is the one, the Mishkan, that was right in the center of the camp. That's the very essence. And the very essence of God's presence, the glory of God, was residing in the tent of witness, the Mishkan. So it's important to keep that in mind as we read through the rest of the parashahs, that it's usually talking about the Mishkan itself, not the tent of meeting, because the tent of meeting, as it says in the latter part of that portion, that when Moshe came out of the tent, he used to come back to the people, and the column of cloud, which had stood in front of the entrance of the tent of meeting, while Moshe was in there talking to Yahweh, it removed itself and went back over the Mishkan later, when the Mishkan was built. But Yehoshua stayed in the tent of meeting. He didn't go back to the camp. Why would that be? I think it's possibly because Yahweh didn't, or Moshe didn't want the people trotting into the camp, into the tent of meeting, just at any time, because it was a place of meeting with Yahweh himself. So it was important to keep it separated from the people. But another thing that I want to focus on throughout this coming cycle, we're starting the new scriptural year next month, this month now, on the 20th March, God willing, it will be Rosh Hashanah Aviv, the beginning of the new scriptural year. And instead of slavishly following the Parashahs, I want to continue on what I started before I was preparing for eye surgery, looking at Yeshua as the heart of Torah, and pick up where we left off. We left off with Yaakov having returned from his 20 years with Lavan, coming back to the land of Israel. So I want to pick up the story from there after Pesach and carry on through, because I think it's vitally important at this time in history that we look at the fact that what was actually presented by Yahweh as the Torah is really wrapped up in 4 simple words. Yahweh said to Moshe, in the 3 books of Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. It appears 136 times in those books. It only appears 3 times in the book of Deuteronomy, which is basically a reenactment or recounting of the message that Moshe had given to the first generation. He's speaking to the second generation when they're preparing to go into the land. So Yahweh is not actually speaking at that stage. It's Moshe who is reiterating the words Yahweh had already given. So all the way through, particularly Exodus and Numbers and Leviticus, those 3 books, Yahweh said to Moshe, and whatever is in quotation marks following that phrase, I believe is the essence of Torah. And that is borne out really what I was saying before in chapter 34, verse 27 and 28. And verse 27 starts, Yahweh said to Moshe, write these words down, because they are the terms of the covenant I have made with you and with Israel. End of quote. That is directly from Yahweh himself. Verse 28 says, Moshe was there with Yahweh for 40 days and 40 nights. I believe that's the important feature we've got to look at. That's why I want to look at Yeshua as the heart of Torah, because he is the Word of God. He was the one who gave it to Moshe in the first place. He is also the one that Shaul speaks about as being the rock, which was with them all the way through the wilderness. So these are important features, I think, in this day and age we're living in now, preparation for the imminent return of Yeshua. We need to sort out exactly what Yahweh said to Moshe as the essence of Torah, and what was actually commentary explaining the things that had been said. So I want to spend the next few months going through those in detail. In the meantime, I think it's important, an aside, what's actually been happening in this last week with Iran, I think is in some ways similar to what actually happened in Egypt at the time when Israel was still there. 6 months ago, Israel had the preeminent strike against Iran and took out a lot of the missile bases, took out the aerial defenses and everything, but left the majority of the leadership intact. Now when you think of that, they were dealing with not just Iran, they were dealing with the tyrannical aspect of Islam. So basically it was an ideology that they were standing against, and supported, of course, by America. This time around, this last week, Israel went straight in and took out the Ayatollah. Took out the head of the ideology. which has been spreading all around Israel, trying to annihilate Israel. So I think there's a similar parallel between what happened in Egypt when Yahweh brought the plagues against Pharaoh. He didn't kill Pharaoh. He knocked out a lot of his economic support, his agricultural support, everything. The plagues affected his whole empire. But it didn't wipe him out. The final plague wiped out every firstborn, including Pharaoh's own son, but not Pharaoh himself. It wasn't until later, then Pharaoh finally says, enough, enough. They leave Egypt, heading for Israel. And then, of course, when they crossed the Red Sea, the ultimate outcome was that Yahweh put an end to Pharaoh himself. And that was the end of the Egyptian superpower. It never rose again. It is an empire, still is an empire, along with all the other 6 empires that have impacted upon Israel. But never again did it become a world superpower. So I think we're seeing a similar sort of pattern, that the whole ideology of Iran was weakened 6 months ago, but now, with the head being taken out completely, it's only a matter of time before Yahweh will have finally brought about the ultimate end of it. But of course that's not the end of the story. We still have the 10 kings who are yet to come against Israel in Revelation. And I think that will come about basically because if you look at the 10 Arab states, Gulf states, they're all Sunni, where Iran was Shiite. So I think they will probably eventually join forces to come against Israel, because that'll still be the obstacle they have to try and annihilate. And I think that's the time when Yeshua himself will actually step onto the stage, and the opening of the 6th seal of Revelation will occur. But that's something we've just got to look at progressively. And I don't think he's given us the whole answer by any means yet. I think it's just a case of wait and see and watch carefully. But bear in mind that all these things have been written about. It's just a matter of putting all the ducks in a row and understanding really what the message of Yahweh has been as it applies to this time in which we live now. They're your thoughts and questions.
I think that what I've learned over the years, of course, coming away from Christianity a long time ago, where you thought Christians were the replacement in Israel, you didn't even think about Israel. And I've really proved or I truly respect that. I think, no, God put his name on that land and on that people. And everything that happens to them is God ordained. Even their exiles, sadly to say, even the Shoah is written about since their great disobedience. Everything that happens and everything they're doing with Yahweh is behind it. For his name's sake.
Yes.
Inheritance.
That's important. For his own name's sake.
The body of Yeshua, of course, is part of it.
Yeah.
Yeshua is King of the Jews after all forever. On a different level, working toward a different goal. Or priesthood. But Israel on this earth still actually carry the mental suffering, the pain, and even the glory eventually. And you can't deny that. And if you're going to be blind to that, watch out.
Exactly.
Just like it really, as well as Egypt, we finished the Shabbat Sukkot for Purim, and then entered into also a Purim-like experience this week.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Patterned almost exactly.
So the hand of Yahweh is certainly in the whole process. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else got any thoughts?
Why did they choose to make it golden calf?
Why did they choose to make it a golden calf? Well, of course, calves were cattle, were things worshipped in Egypt by various nations. Bearing in mind those nations, of course, that had gone in through the famine time, would have still been there, slaves to Pharaoh, like Israel themselves. So they would have had that as in the back of their mind, that was a form of worship. And it was probably the prominent expression. I mean, there could have been, as he says, basically, who is it in Acts? Stephen says in Acts that basically they've carried the worship of the stars all the way through history in Israel. And that's what Yahweh warned them against. So obviously the golden calf was a tangible expression of a multiplicity of gods. When you think of Hinduism, they've got millions of gods, but they usually have one expression, tangible expression.
I mean, the mixed multitude in the background, in the wilderness, had the hidden gods still.
Yes,
and
yes.
About they knew. That's why he exposed that. Parashah.
Yeah.
They knew about that.
Well, that's another thing that's interesting. Today's reading started with something that's completely out of character with the golden calf incident. It had nothing to do with it. It talks about what Yahweh expected of his people when they take a census. Now, we know the census is not taken till much later. The first census is taken in Numbers, which probably happened before they actually left Horeb, but that's something we'll look at after Pesach as part of the whole equation. But yeah, the ones in the mixed multitude that came out of Egypt with the sons of Jacob, or the descendants of Jacob, had to be grafted into one of the 12 tribes of Israel. And that's really what the census was all about. So it's really out of context in this particular portion, in this particular parashah. And it's the same with the things that follow when it's talking about various aspects of the Mishkan. It's following on, of course, from what we've read in the previous couple of weeks. But the Mishkan itself wasn't built until much later, so it's really difficult to tie it together.
Grafted in, and they were more visible for what they were doing or not doing.
Yeah. And again, in the same parashah, after the golden calf incident, when Yahweh says to Moshe, go up to the mountain again, cutting the 2 tablets yourself, and I will inscribe them with the message. He says again, he reiterates, well, first of all, Moshe wanted to see him face to face. So he lets his back be seen, but no one will see his face. But he then goes on to reiterate again who he is, YHVH, and explains in detail, and then carries on talking about the fact that they will keep the Shabbat. Now, these are vital issues that come up. These are parts of the same 10 words, but they are key factors that Israel keeps losing, or the people kept losing sight of. Yeah.
I think it's worth noting there, the calf, like the specific image of the calf wasn't the issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's what they were doing with it.
Right.
Yeah, they could have cast a snake, a goose, they could have cast a Daffy Duck.
Exactly.
Yeah. It was that they wanted
Just
to go on their terms.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. They wanted a tangible God that they could worship and dance and cavort around and have orgies in front of and do all sorts of pagan things that they'd been used to doing. So it was the representation of their form of worship.
And we see the same thing happens with the serpent that Moses was commanded to build later.
Yes.
As well.
Mm-hmm.
Bronze serpent we find in...
It's in...
Which king of Israel was it that ended up destroying it?
Right, it's in Numbers. Yeah.
It was later destroyed because people started to worship that.
Well, yes, yep, but that of course, we don't really realise the significance of it, but they were actually being bitten by natural snakes. And by looking upon the bronze snake on the pole, they were cleansed of the toxins of the bite. Bring that forward, of course, you see the parallel with Yeshua hanging on the stake, taking away the pain that they brought upon themselves.
Moshe lifted up the snake in the wilderness.
Yeah.
So the Son of Man must be pushed up.
Yeah. So just by looking at it, they were healed. So yes, when you consider that, contrast that with the golden calf.
Yeah. It almost feels odd if you don't have that context later.
Yes. Well, that's the thing. That would have probably been a major problem for them too. That, he destroyed them, made us drink the dust of the golden calf.
Yeah, it's nice to look at
Now he goes and builds that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why they had to have faith in what they were taught.
Yes.
And what they knew. And we'll see this many times over through the time in the wilderness and right through the time that Israel were in the land. It was all about having faith, because ultimately trusting Yahweh.
Calves have gone from antiquity because Hinduism still honours the cow.
It does, that's right.
Nobody honours sheep.
No.
The Egyptians hated sheep, that's why Israel got the best land.
Yeah.
Shepherds.
Yes.
Cows come through for some reason.
Yep.
Or cows, perfectly peaceful animal.
Yep. It's a sacrificial animal too.
It's also worth noting though, the cow was the symbol, was it Hathor, one of the Egyptian goddesses?
That'd be right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so again, it's that whole thing, we need something in our terms, something we already understand.
Yes. Yep. So really it comes back to the same situation, that Yahweh has set apart his chosen people, and all the rest of the world just carry on with the same practices, and he allows them to carry on with the same practices.
Yeah.
But those are his people, that is his way. If they're going to be part of his community, they have to follow his commands. That's why we need to sort out what are commands and what are actual commentary as to the nature of the commands.
Yes.
And it'll help us to understand more deeply the significance of Yeshua's message. But as it's now 12:10, I guess we better draw to a close. Talk again over lunch maybe.